the very far north of Scotland boasts some of the remotest and most beautiful landscape in the entire country. It's easy to feel dwarfed by the scale of things out here. Beyond the mountains, the ever-widening horizon seems to stretch to infinity, making you feel somehow lost in this vast landscape. Scotland is studded with lochs, over 30,000 of them at the last count. And to appreciate them better, I'm on a loch hopping journey across Scotland, exploring the long fjord-like sea lochs around the coast, crossing the great freshwater lochs of the Highlands and discovering the secrets of the many lochans that scatter the open moors. In this programme, I'm exploring the inner recesses of mainland Scotland's biggest cavern. I'll then have a lesson in balancing rocks before walking out to uncover the secrets of a lost beach. For this grand tour, I'm heading to the lochs of northern Sutherland. My journey starts in the countryside around Loch Hope, heads north and then west to the dark waters of Loch Eriboll, west again to the Kyle of Durness and on to Kinlochbervie, from where a trek across the moors leads to the Atlantic coast and the wonderful expanse of Sandwood Bay. This is Loch Hope, which stretches for 9 kilometres south into the remote heart of Sutherland. Standing guard over its waters is Ben Hope, Scotland's most northerly Munro. Here the landscape is immense and seemingly inhospitable, but despite its vast emptiness, it's been home to people since the earliest times, as the beautiful Iron Age broch of Dundonegale amply demonstrates. The broch is about 2,300 years old and is said to be named after a Pictish king called Dornadilla. Now, at least that's according to George Buchanan, the 16th century scholar and grim-faced tutor to the young King James VI. Now, Buchanan wanted to include Dornadilla in his list of ancient Scottish kings. According to Buchanan, Dornadilla lived in the 3rd century, and by a miracle, there's even a portrait of him hanging in Holyrood Palace. Now, somewhat improbably, the artist has given Dornadilla a rather flamboyant and rakish air with a magnificent moustache, which hardly seems, well, true to life. But the point wasn't representational accuracy, it was to demonstrate the incredible 2,000-year-old lineage of the Stuart kings. And a handsome bunch they were. But in reality, we know nothing for certain about this mythological warrior and his connection to the broch, which is so old that its origins predate written history. Ian McLean is something of a broch expert. He gives me an insight into these mysterious structures.
Brochs are somewhere between 400 BC and 200 AD. But like most modern buildings, they go through multiple phases of use and reuse.
Any idea how old this one is?
This one's probably about 200 BC onwards, but really without more archaeology, we couldn't tell that for sure. We're looking at particular things like the triangle lintel and the height of the broch to tell that it was possibly built early on.
And how many are there in Scotland?
There are about 500 brochs in Scotland, but most of them are concentrated in the north and northern Isles of Scotland, so it's a truly northern phenomenon, really. We don't really know why they were built, but we do know that not everybody lived in a broch, which kind of speaks a little bit of social stratification, that this is an elite structure that belonged to, say, a clan chief, and he ruled it over, lorded it over the people who lived around in this landscape. So it's a community monument, if you like, a bit like an early precursor to a castle.
Ian is passionate about these ancient structures, which he says were built at strategic points in the landscape. To reimagine those times, he's developing a project to build a unique 21st century version of a broch.
So as you can see, it's a huge dry stone tower, 13 metres high. It's also got a settlement around it. So it's not just a broch, it's a whole nucleated settlement here that's here.
It's an amazing thought, it really is.
Imagine that rebuilt brand new. You can chip in if you want.
Leaving Ian to imagine a future with ancient brochs, I continue along the shores of Loch Hope and down to the coast and the second loch on this grand tour, Loch Eriboll. This is a magnificent arm of the sea that forces its way some 15 kilometres into the wild country of the far north. The remote location of Loch Eriboll made it the ideal place to conduct a secret operation at the close of the Second World War. Into these cold northern waters, some of the deadliest weapons of the Nazi war machine bowed out of the conflict for good.
Out there, Hitler's U-boat sampled the bitter taste of defeat. In May 1945, Loch Eriboll became no stranger to the sinister outline of the so-called Grey Wolves. In fact, 33 of them surrendered in the loch.
The crews were sent to prison of war camps and their U-boats sent to Loch Ryan or to Loch Foyle in Northern Ireland. Later, they were towed out to sea and sunk off the coast.
I've got a photograph here showing one of the submarines that surrendered. Now that is U-1231, and you can tell that it was taken in the loch because of the mountain in the background. It's the same as the mountain behind me. Now, unlike other grey wolves, U-1231 never sank any Allied shipping and carried a less than deadly cargo.
When U-1231 was escorted into the loch, she was found to be carrying a vast quantity of fine French wine. She seems to have operated as an underwater off-licence for the German Navy and never fired a shot in anger. The ultimate booze cruise. It's hard to visualise U-boats in the loch today. There is literally no trace of their presence anywhere, and their memory is fast becoming lost in this wild landscape. However, on the hillside above Loch Eriboll, there's a more lasting reminder of wartime naval activity.
There was once an unofficial custom to leave a more permanent reminder of a ship's visit. Now, when crews came ashore, some sailors would climb the hill and arrange large stones in letter shapes, paint them white, and spell out the name of their ship.
On the windswept hillside, I meet Graham Bruce, who rediscovered the stones some years ago. Graham wants me to lend a hand repainting the stones that spell out the name of a great British battleship.
So what's the name of the ship?
Well, the principal one we're going to see is the Mighty Hood, the leader of the British Navy in the interwar years. The British Home Fleet would literally sail round the shores of Britain, and they came in 1934. 10 days they spent. And amazingly, these sailors were given shore leave on Loch Eriboll. And you can imagine the reaction to that.
What's there to do?
What else could you possibly do on the side of Loch Eriboll except climb a mountain and then, yeah, put some graffiti on a hillside to show that your ship had been anchored in the loch.
After trudging over the heather for half an hour, we arrive at the stones.
We've made it.
HMS Hood.
Yep, the biggest of the names on the hillside.
Well, I have to say the stone's a bit smaller than I thought. If we could do with some touching up.
They could that.
Have you got that paint?
I've got that paint and I've got the brushes.
Painting and decorating at altitude.
Yeah, kind of different.
For many years, the Hood stones were forgotten and lost in the heather until a chance conversation prompted Graham to look for them. Having found them, he then enlisted a group of pupils from the local school where he was head teacher to help restore them.
What happened to HMS Hood after she visited here in Loch Eriboll?
Well, in 1941, she was sent to hunt the Bismarck, a very modern German ship causing havoc in the North Atlantic. The Hood was in the Denmark Strait off the coast of Greenland, and there she encountered the Prince Eugene and the Bismarck, and unfortunately received a direct hit, and unfortunately she went down with 1,418 men on board and only 3 survived.
It's an incredible loss of life.
Huge loss of life and a huge blow to British morale in 1941.
And I imagine some of the men who painted and repainted these stones may well have been on board when the hood went down.
Yes, it's quite possible they were.
So it puts you in direct touch with history, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Repainting these
yeah.
stones just as men did back in the 1930s.
Absolutely.
I leave Graham painting the stones and make my way back towards the shores of Loch Eriboll, where I meet up with Lotte Globe, a Danish artist and ceramicist who's made her home here for the past 20 years. Lotte is inspired by nature, the colours and textures of the hills, the sky and the sea. She also incorporates the things she finds on her long walks into the work she creates, especially in her celebrated ceramic books.
Well, the idea came from when I very first was climbing Ben Spearnard up here, and I always love rocks. And there's a whole row of rocks like a bookshelves.
What, on a cliff face?
On a cliff face, and it looks exactly like books. And I thought, oh, I'd like to make a book with rocks in from my walk. And that was basically how it started. Books are something very important in my life. And thinking about that, one day maybe they will get extinct. And it's all to do with the book being fossilized. And
so it lives forever?
It lives forever.
All kinds of found objects go into Lotte's books. Bones, stones and the soil beneath her feet.
These are all local rocks from Ben Hope, so I might...
This is from Ben Hope?
Yeah.
So is this book going to be called Book of Hope?
Yeah, exactly.
Lotte also likes to include fragments of her own writing, which she slips between the ceramic pages.
That's secret.
Right, okay.
You can only...
It's in
feel,
Danish, is it?
Yeah. you can feel the thoughts when you hold the book when it's finished.
Back outside, Lotte leads me to a miniature broch, which she's had built to display some of her books after being fired in a kiln hot enough to melt rock.
This was the very first book I made.
Wow.
The very, very first book. And it's the best.
It's the best, the first and the best. Look at the quartz, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's just
beginning
amazing.
to melt. You were talking earlier about trying to make books immortal, and they do. They look like great fossils in the landscape.
Yeah.
Looks as if they've always been here.
Yeah.
Just waiting to be found and understood.
Yeah.
Leaving Lotte to her ceramics, I continue around the loch. As elsewhere in the Highlands, the single-track road has its own protocol for drivers, which can present difficulties for visitors. Back in the heady summer of 1969, one of those visitors was John Lennon of the Beatles. Unlikely as it may seem, he was driving along this road with his 2 kids and his new wife, Yoko Ono.
Just as surprisingly, their car wasn't John Lennon's famous psychedelic Rolls-Royce, but a very modest Austin Maxi.
It was a wet day and rain was falling heavily. Suddenly, a car approached at speed in the opposite direction. Lennon panicked, swerved and went off the road. The car was a write-off. Lennon, Yoko and the kids were sent to Golspie Hospital.
So what, you may ask, was the internationally famous superstar and Beatle doing so far north and so far from the lights of celebrity? Well, the answer lies in the little village of Durness, just around the corner from Loch Eriboll.
This is Durness, population about 400, overlooking the beautiful sands of Sango Bay. This is where John Lennon spent his boyhood summers, staying with Scottish cousins in a cottage by the sea. The original house has been rebuilt since then, but a plaque on the wall commemorates the Lennon connection.
Now, it's amazing to think of young Lennon running around on the sands down here, barefoot, with his bucket and his spade, and playing with local kids and having the time of his life. Now, it's said that when he was here, he felt more Scottish than English, and even called himself Jock Lennon.
When John Lennon returned in 1969 to reclaim his childhood, and to hide from the world, he'd have known all about the greatest hidey hole of all, the strange, eerily evocative Smoo Cave, which is just a kilometre along the coast from Sango Bay.
Now, the name Smoo is thought to derive from an old Norwegian word, smuga, which means a hiding place. And it shares the same root as the English word to smuggle. And we all know how much smugglers just love hiding things in caves.
Below the path, a narrow inlet penetrates the cliffs. This feature is called Gia Smoo and was formed by the sea eroding the soft limestone rocks on the cliffs here. Smoo is one of the most popular cave sites in the entire country. The novelist Sir Walter Scott came here in 1814 by boat and wrote about its wonders. And indeed today it is still a wonder to behold. Showing me around is local caving expert Fraser Eadie.
So Fraser, it's absolutely huge, this cave. It's the biggest one I've seen in Scotland anyway.
Yep, and you've got the opening there, that's about 65 feet high by about 45 foot wide.
And was it a sea cave at one time?
This was made by the sea. This is only a small fragment of the cave. The cave used to go all the way out to sea, and you can see the ceilings collapsed all the way back to here.
The giant sea cave is only part of the complex of caverns at Smoo. Fraser wants to show me more and leads me towards a dark opening, the entrance to a subterranean river where we cross the waters of an underground loch.
That's amazing, Fraser. This chimney opening up above us in the roof of the cave, that's an incredible height above our heads.
Now, usually, Paul, we've got a waterfall thundering down here, fills the whole wall, but we've not had rain for 3 or 4 weeks, so it's very unusual to see the cave like this.
What height is that above our heads then?
150 foot up there.
And there's a 150-foot waterfall normally inside this cave.
Thunders in here. Sounds like a
Amazing,
train.
amazing. I think that's connected to a local character, is it not?
Yeah, so McMurdo, he was a hitman for the Clan Mackay in the 16th century. And he used to kill his people by throwing them down into the waterfall.
It was his way of disposing of unwanted bodies or people that didn't agree with the chief of Clan Mackay.
He was very efficient. 18 people or so he threw down here.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Shrugging off thoughts of grisly murder, we land on the other shore and make our way deeper underground. The tunnel ends where water bubbles to the surface in a clear pool. Fraser shows me what looks like a handful of wet sand, but to him, it's an important clue to understanding the history of Smoo Cave.
That's charcoal that's washing out the back of the cave, yep.
How did
If
that
you've
get
got
there?
charcoal in the cave, then it comes from fire. Someone's been building a fire in the cave.
So you think that in the distant past, there are parts of the cavern which are no longer accessible were being used by human beings?
Exactly, yep. I think there's a chamber back here, yet to be discovered, where people were once living. And for the last 5 years, we've been digging a tunnel from the first cave, trying to break into it.
And it's an eerie place as well. And I can hear, is that a waterfall? I can hear in the distance.
Yeah, there's always noises in here. The scary part is when you hear voices and you know you're in here yourself.
Right.
That's when it gets scary.
Well, you've heard voices.
Yeah, when we're in digging. So quite often when I'm in digging, I've been digging all day and the waterfall's going, there's a lot of noise in here. And when I'm coming out with the spoil, you would swear you could hear children's voices outside. When you come out that little opening, the cave's empty.
But of course, in myth and legend, the underworld was associated with terrible things, darkness, the devil.
Yeah.
So are you sure the noises that we can hear off are not really voices of ghosts?
Do you know, I think I'm going to cancel my digging. I'm going to find a new job. I'm getting scared in here.
But it
no,
isn't-
I don't think so. But there's lots of legends, and I think every cave has that legend, you know, smugglers, the devil, you know.
From the secrets of Smoo Cave and its association with the Dark Lord himself, I'm glad at last to be back in the fresh air when I head to Balnakeil Bay, which marks the entrance to the extraordinary sandy shallows of the Kyle of Durness. At low tide, the sands of the Kyle are exposed, creating a maze of channels and rivulets. But even here, the mysteries of Smoo Cave cast a long shadow. Down at the old burial ground and ruined church is a curious grave. Inside the roofless ruin is a tomb positioned against the south wall.
Aha, now this is what I've been looking for. This tomb is much more ornate than any of the graves outside. And it's full of ornate carvings. And down here, we've got the image of an archer firing an arrow at what appears to be a deer. So we've got a deer hunt going on. And here we've got a skull and crossbones to remind us of the inevitability of death and the grave. And a strange inscription which seems to read, "Donald McMurchow here lies low, ill to his friends and worse to his foe, but true to his master through wealth and woe." It's very curious indeed.
According to local legend, or one of them at least, McMurchow is none other than the mass murderer who disposed of his victims down the sinkhole of Smoo Cave on the orders of his master, the Earl of Ray.
It seems that Donald McMurchow was fearful for his soul in the afterlife and paid the princely sum of £1,000 for the chance to be buried in the church to improve his chances of redemption. But he was considered to be far too wicked for that. However, the church authorities did reach a compromise and allowed his remains to be buried in the wall. And there he still lies, in a kind of no man's land between heaven and hell.
Putting all wickedness behind, I leave Balnakeil and cross the wilderness beneath the mist-wreathed peak of Foinavan, continue along the shores of Loch Inchard to the west coast and Kinloch Barvey, known to locals as KLB. Huge refrigerated trucks collect fish from the large fish market in the village and carry it to restaurants across Europe. But I'm less interested in the harvest of the seas than the rocks around the town. Just down the road from KLB, I meet up with master craftsman George Gunn, who's keen to pass on his skills to the younger generation.
You have basically two outside skins of stone. You've got an outside face, this outside face here, and you've got the same on the other side. And they're built up to try and cover the joints between the stones, the same as in brickwork. And then the inside has all these smaller stones called hearting. It's very important because when you build the bigger stones in, they need pinned from the back to stop them wobbling.
So like with most things in life, you need a good heart.
You do, yes.
George has been building dry stone walls for 36 years now. It's a skill that's taken him around the world, from Holland to the States and to New Zealand. For those who've been bitten by the diking bug, he runs courses and workshops in building techniques that go back to the ancient Broch builders and beyond.
So I think we'll put this long one in.
Right, do you want a hand with that?
So if you take that corner, wind your feet, all these stones, and we'll sit it up on top here.
You have to do this by yourself, do you?
Yeah.
Ooh, fingers, watch.
Yeah, and wind your fingers. There we go. Up this way a little bit.
There. Is that any good? Seems to
That's
fit
good.
pretty well.
Stable. Yeah, just like that. Yeah. So that one fits in there.
One of the first big contracts that George undertook was the restoration of 30 miles of dry stone dikes on a local farm. It was something of a learning curve.
I said I would work there 3 days a week, and I was there 3 days a week for 10 years before I got it all under control.
That's a lot of wall. 30 years.
You always knew there's something to do on the Monday.
For the final part of my grand tour, I'm passing the township of Old Shoremore and on to the end of the road at Shigra, from where I trek past the little Loch na Gainniv and over the lonely moors to Sandwood Bay.
I've always wanted to go to Sandwood Bay, but until now, I've never had the chance, so I'm really looking forward to this last leg of my grand tour. Now, it's billed as one of the remotest and most beautiful beaches in all of Scotland, and I can't wait to see it for myself.
The trouble is, to get there involves a pretty stiff 13-kilometre hike across the moors, there and back again. Historically, Sandwood was always regarded as remote. In the 17th century, maps noted that it was an area of extreme wilderness where wolves roamed free.
Fortunately, no wolves have been seen here for at least 400 years, so I should be fine, I hope.
After a walk of almost 1.5 hours, I get my first glimpse of Sandwood Bay and a loch not far from the dunes.
Now, this is pretty much your first view of the magnificent Sandwood Bay with its breakers crashing in on the beach. And over here, we've got Sandwood Loch, and despite it being so close to the sea, it's actually fresh water. Now, since Neolithic times, this place has been home to hundreds and hundreds of generations of people, but for the last 200 years or so, it's been pretty much completely deserted, and there's just a couple of ruined shepherds' cottages, ruined walls and sheep banks to testify that people ever lived here at all. It's utterly deserted.
Reaching the beach, I'm exhilarated by the huge, sweeping expanse of sand in front of me, stretching for 3 kilometres north towards Cape Wrath and Scotland's northwest corner. To the south stands the impressive sea stack of Ambuchel, which in English means the herdsman. It towers 65 metres above the sea. Amazing to think that it's a popular rock climbing destination.
There's something really exhilarating about the sheer scale of things here at Sandwood Bay, especially when you see the North Atlantic pounding the shore. There's nothing really between here and North America, thousands of miles away, and it makes you feel very insignificant, almost lost in the landscape, which makes this a fitting place for me to end my grand tour from Loch Hope to Sandwood Bay.